joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're looking at Europe's ever-widening horse meat scandal. With us to talk about it is Stefan de VRIES, Paris correspondent for Dutch radio station RTL4, Geneviève Savigny of the French Small Farmers Union, the Confédération paysanne, and you're also a farmer in the Alps, where you farm, what is it, wheat?
Lavender, and myself, I raise chicken. And
you raise chickens for your own consumption?
No.
You sell
direct sell.
Okay.
I sell chicken and all kind of poultry.
Okay. And with us, Didier QUEMENER, chef and food critic. And from London, Dean Best, editor of industry newsletter justfood.com. By the way, it's not just horse meat. The Independent reports, quoting a French environmentalist, on suspicions of donkey meat. Stefan de VRIES saying he was partial to horse meat. Geneviève Savigny, again, this is a cultural gap because Corsican donkey sausage is actually quite a delicacy. The other aspect of this, and we were talking about it just before the break, was this issue of the whole issue of, we're in the middle of this blame game, and how we look at how you regulate the industry, and whose responsibility is what they call traceability, regulators or the food industry. Let's hear what the European Commissioner had to say on the matter going into that Wednesday meeting in Brussels.
Till now, it is a labelling issue, which does not mean that it's not serious. Of course, it will be more serious if it's a food safety issue. But it is still serious because that means that someone has tried to deceive the European consumers somewhere down this line.
Someone's tried to deceive the European consumers. At this point in time, Dean Best, how is the story playing out? We saw that there were heated exchanges in the House of Commons this Wednesday over this issue. But ultimately, what will be the upshot in Britain?
I think at first, especially when the story broke in January, there was some humour among consumers. There was a lot of jokes going around on social media, on Twitter, about the frozen beef burgers. But as this has unfolded, as the seriousness of the issue has become clear, and as consumers have realised that perhaps the food industry does not have the control and oversight of the supply chain that they thought it had, consumers have sort of grown very frustrated with the issue. There have been vox pops on national television news bulletins where consumers are saying that they will switch away from specific products, frozen products, that kind of thing.
And further to Geneviève Savigny's point just before the break, where she was saying how this should raise the issue of shortening the supply chain and perhaps, producing stuff closer to home. Has that been at all talked about?
I think so. On Saturday, the Food Standards Agency had a meeting with industry representatives, and the chief executive of Morrison's was interviewed outside by the BBC, Morrison's being the fourth largest supermarket chain here in the UK. And Morrison's is known in the industry, and it does try to get across to consumers for having what they call a vertically integrated supply chain. They produce a lot of their fresh produce in-house. And the chief executive was trying to get the point across that the food supply chain is far too complex. It just needs to be farmer and then abattoir, processor, and then retailer, and that perhaps with the growth with the internationalization of the food supply chain, it has become too complex.
It has become too complex. Didier QUEMENER, where do you do your shopping?
In the market. I go.
Not at the supermarket.
No, I go to open air markets. I buy fresh products. I understand that people don't have time to cook, and it's reasonable that from time to time you need to go to the supermarket or the French store that sells frozen products and buy prepared meal. The problem is that when you're a consumer, if you're buying processed food, you have a right to know what's in your food, and you have the right to know where it's coming from. The traceability has two goals. The first one is to prevent health risk. The second one is to make sure that we know the origin of the product. And it's working great since the beef, we had this story, the mad cow, so now you know where it's coming from. There's a label, and labeling is there. It started in 1997. But when you buy a processed food product in France today, you don't know where the product is coming from. You have no idea where the products transit, where they were produced, or what's the quality of the product. And I think it's a real problem for the consumer today.
All right. Well, it seems as though people in Scotland are taking their cue from you. Scottish Daily, The Courier and Examiner reporting that butchers across central Scotland, Fife and Tayside have seen trade soar by as much as 25%, there's the front page this Wednesday, in the wake of the horsemeat scandal. However, and this is important, not everyone can afford to go to the local butcher. In fact, British market research group Mintel put out a survey recently that shows consumers are tightening their belts more and more. 89% on a budget, 53% agree low price more important than brand name, 68% proud to tell friends about good brands that they find. And the numbers of people going for those bargain brands, it says Stefan de VRIES, has increased, according to that survey, from 20% in 2008 to 30% today. That's a huge jump.
Yeah, it's huge. It's also because due to the crisis, of course, but it's also, I mean, in the case of Great Britain, Great Britain has another problem, is that it imports the majority of its food, so it doesn't have its own resources, which is a specific problem to the UK. And yes, of course, we see all these major supermarkets also in France. I mean, people are used to grew up with good food, but still in France, the huge supermarkets you see at the outskirts of cities shows that people really want a lot of food for as little as much money. So it's a problem of these times that we don't know where our food comes from and that we don't have the money anymore to pay good food. Because if you go to a market and do your shopping over there, it's probably twice or three times as expensive compared to when you go to the supermarket. So yeah, what to do? That's a big question.
Geneviève, what's the answer?
Well, my answer is not the answer, but it's true that some people are very concerned with their budget and money. But if
what do you do if you earn minimum wage? How do you shop?
If you buy raw material more than processed food, it's already much cheaper. If you buy local and seasonal fruits from the season, and you can have good bargain and you can cook quite cheaply. Definitely. So it's also a question of culture. If you are able to cook a little and to do a little things by yourself, then cooking is not so expensive and having good food is not that expensive.
But you have to have the time to do it. And a lot of people as well, they're swamped. It's households, it's not like 30 or 40 years ago. In each household, both parents work. So how do you find the time to cook? The frozen foods seems sometimes like a necessity.
Well, it's something easy. It's a necessity. It's a choice. You can use it.
You still say it's a choice.
It's a choice because you can also use raw food, raw frozen food, and if you have just nature fish or something, then it's also much more much cheaper and much easier to have a good traceability.
Yeah, that's right. And the problem is also today's society is based on waste. You could cook something and you're going to have leftovers for 1 or 2 days, but people don't want leftovers. One day they want to have fish, the following day they want meat, the third day they want something else. It doesn't take that much time to cook something very simple. As long as you could cook for 2 or 3 meals at a time, you keep them in your fridge for maybe 4 or 5 days maximum, and then you're all set. And comparing the price of supermarkets versus like open-air markets, let me tell you, I do a lot of like research and shopping with people. Sometimes some of my customers, when I bring them to the markets, and when they look at the prices on markets, they're surprised because the packaging itself, when you go to the supermarket, you pay for that. So when you look at the price per kilogram of, for instance, ground beef or ham, I will take ham because that's a perfect example. You go to the local butcher, you buy ham, it's going to be roughly around 18 euros per kilogram. You go to the supermarket, I defy anyone to find a decent quality ham that's going to be under that price. It's always above that price.
But again, you're mentioning a decent quality ham. Most people, they're just going to go, as we were just saying with that survey, to the bargain brand.
Yes, because we are in this competition of quality versus quality, quantity versus quality. And we don't need to eat that much meat to start with, but also it's the fact that it's true, as you said, people, when they're going to spend 10 euros, they feel like they want to have the maximum for their money. And that's part of the problem too. I mean, sometimes we just have to take a step back and say, you know what, maybe just 3 or 4 ounces of meat is going to be enough, and I could just like buy fresh products.
How will that argument, Dean Best, the one made just now by Didier QUEMENER, how will that fly in the United Kingdom among ordinary consumers?
I don't know. I think there is an education problem, food education problem here in the UK. I think that a long-term solution to some of these issues could be sort of further investment in food education throughout state schools in the UK. You know, thinking anecdotally, I think that there has been a couple of generations now where the skills that perhaps consumers once had back in the 40s, 50s, 60s to cook from scratch has been lost. I think, you know, with the rise of TV celebrity chefs and more foodie programs here in the UK, it is back on the rise. But I think amongst the general populace, there is that kind of almost sort of lazy option to choose convenience food. But then that said, you know, as I said earlier, price does play a key role, and for some consumers, they have to sort of opt for these kind of products, and therefore the industry does have an important role in playing to oversee the supply chain more closely, I think.
All right, so educating consumers, although maybe it's perhaps best if you don't know what's in your dinner plate or how it's raised or killed. John Harris, writing in The Guardian this week, said, you may be reassured to know that EU regulations insist that if it's called meat, it has to be, quote, skeletal muscle with naturally included or adherent fat and connective tissue, and that our own Food Standards Agency insists that economy beef burgers must contain a heartening 47% of the same stuff sourced from cows. As ever, modern capitalism spoils us, eh? So if I read this correctly, Dean Best, if 47% of those economy beef burgers have to be beef, then they're not even breaking the law if they put horse meat in there.
I think that this issue has brought those kind of facts and details to the fore, and that, again, it could have a positive effect. Consumers will be paying a lot more interest into what goes into their food. There have been a number of kind of food marketing associations here in the UK, the Soil Association, the certifiers behind organic food, Red Tractor, which is the provenance body for British produce, are really trying to make some positive PR out of this and saying to consumers, look, if you buy organic, if you buy produce with the Red Tractor logo on, then you can be sure of what goes into these foods. These are sort of high quality products, and you can be sure that the supply chain has been more robust than in this kind of wider horse meat saga.
Geneviève, Savigny, this brings us back to what you were saying in the first part. You're kind of wary of the upshot of this being more regulations and everything. But when you read this, shouldn't there be better regulations on what you put on those labels? If something called beef only has 47% beef, I hate to think what that other 53% is, by the way. But.
No, it's true that the food industry is very powerful, and they have the regulation they want so that they make bigger profits. And so it's good if you have a burger with very little meat, it will be very cheap. But it shouldn't be possible to have so little meat or to have a lot of fat. Like you have poor quality mincemeat. It's over 15% fat. And so it's a very bad quality, but then it is cheap. But the poor people have sometimes very poor quality food if it goes through processing.
Through processed food. Stefan de Vries, we're seeing this Wednesday how the scandal is also spreading to Germany, yes, Europe's largest economy. Those ministers sitting down in Brussels, what are they going to do?
Excellent question. I think they will have to find the source of this fraud, and then they will probably say, well, the rules have not been applied. Countries themselves should do more to control the food chain. But that's hardly possible because you can't put a policeman behind every hamburger. But it's definitely not a European problem. That's probably what the conclusion will be. But it's really on the national level, in the sense that it's not European rules or Brussels who decide something to do. it's probably there's a problem.
But here, the
somewhere.
UK is applying European rules, the food standards agencies, so they are offering the guidelines.
Probably, but apparently it's not being enforced well enough. Otherwise, there wouldn't be this problem.
Wouldn't be this problem, but again, the issue when you look now is how will these different countries then at the end of the day, because it looks like the scandal over this is not going away anytime soon. So how will they react in terms of getting some kind of rules underway and perhaps more regulators?
Yeah, well, that's a political choice. And as Geneviève said, the food industry is a very powerful lobby in Brussels. And at the end, it's not really Brussels or the European Commission that decides, because they really want to do what's in the interest of the consumers, of the European consumers. But it's usually the countries, so the ministers of agriculture who really try to have the least rules possible, because they also have the lobby, the food industry behind them, and that's very perverse system, and I think we will have to deal with it as long as we live.
Final point on this. Earlier, Stefan de Vries was saying how you go to the supermarket in the French suburbs, and it's no longer the stereotype of the Frenchman who seeks out the best produce possible to make the best meal. Your friends who meet with wholesalers, who go to the big wholesale market south of Paris, what are they saying about the quality of the produce, the meats we're getting?
Well, you know, when you go to, let's refer to Rungis, for instance, the biggest market ever. When you go there, traceability is the key word. So anything that you buy over there has to be labeled, and there's a name for everything. There are veterinaries over there. They check the temperatures. They check if there's antibiotics and there are hormones and this and that. So I'd say that when you go to those places, you're probably safer than just going to the supermarket and buying a processed food, because when you go to Rungis, I mean, it's like
the big wholesale market near Orly Airport.
Yeah, and everything is just right there, open, and you have nothing to hide, because anytime you need to show up your receipt, you need to show the traceability of your product. It's right there. That's why when you go back as a consumer to the market, buying your products, you know where it's coming from.
Find the time to go to the market. Didier QUEMENER, I want to thank you. Your website is called foodme.fr. You've got Valentine's Day recipes on there, by the way. Also, I want to thank Stefan de Vries, Geneviève Savigny for being with us, and Dean Best of justfood.com for being with us from London. Thank you for joining us here for the France 24 debate.